Arab chic, be who you want to be, includes robe and headpiece. One size, not plus size. Perfect. Inshallah, brothers, inshallah. Whatever that means. When the Saints Row Reboot was announced back in 2021, I was absolutely livid. As you might have noticed, taking what was once a hardcore gangster franchise and turning it into a soulless ESG-approved Zoomer's idea of what a hardcore gangster franchise would be can really only be described as... what's the word I'm looking for? Disgusting. As someone who grew up with the original Saints Row, probably an unwise idea by the way, mother, to see this new age drivel try to take its place all these years later was like hearing that someone had dug up your childhood friend who died and is now using his skeleton as a prop for an upcoming pantomime. Now back then I said that there were two possible timelines that we could end up in. The good timeline and the bad timeline. In the bad timeline, the mindless consumerist hordes of fanboys would ensure that this pitiful piece of software would be financially successful enough to warrant a sequel. Sending a clear message to the gaming industry that it's fine to disrespect the fans that made you, as they'll still buy your garbage no matter what. Whereas in the good timeline, people resisted the power of intellectual property by refusing to buy it, ensuring the game was a financial flop. Sending a clear message to the gaming industry that such hostile transformations of loved brands is simply unacceptable. And look, I'll be honest, at the time, I didn't know which way it was gonna go. On the one hand, the game was blatantly a cringe fest, but on the other hand, there really is no more of a pathetic demographic on Earth than gaming fanboys. Most large gaming companies now can really do no wrong, as they have a legion of mind slaves, nostalgia trapped from childhood, who will genuinely follow these companies off a cliff, no matter what. Just take a look at Reddit whenever a new AAA game comes out from an already established company or franchise. The amount of Mountain Dew addicted bog creatures that crawl out the woodwork to defend even the most amateur of work is genuinely unbelievable to observe. Oh my gosh, I'm so hyped! I'm so hyped!
Game of the heckin' year, bros.
There is no woke agenda!
And even if there was, how does this affect you personally?
We love trash! We love trash! We love trash! Oh, you know the types. And the Saints Row Reboot had a ton of them, defending the game from announcement to release as if their lives depended on it. And then the game actually came out, and it sucked. Wow. Who could have seen that coming? And so it was only a matter of time until we received the news that Volition, the company behind not just the reboot, but the entire franchise itself, was closing its doors forever, via an order from above. Now, putting aside the obvious tragedy of people losing their jobs and a 30-year-old company with a hefty legacy closing its doors, this news led people to declare, as bizarre as it sounds, that we must officially be in the good timeline. As a sequel of a similar caliber to the reboot is almost guaranteed to never see the light of day, with the Saints Row IP being put back in the vault to perhaps one day have an unlikely resurrection, and Volition's demise being seen as a lesson to the gaming industry to actually listen to your customers. So it's just another episode of Get Woke, Go Broke, right? Right? Well, yeah, obviously, but... Look, I have to be honest with you. There's more to this story than what meets the eye. Because yes, had the reboot sold much better, naturally it would have been much less likely that Volition would have been on the chopping block. But the event that triggered their demise was actually, believe it or not, completely out of their hands. And the main lesson to take away from Volition's shutdown perhaps isn't get woke, go broke, but something else entirely. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, Alex, why on earth are you dressed like an Arabian sheik? I mean, what, have you converted to Islam or something? Well, yes, but that's a story for another time. No, the reason why is because this story has to do with a rather, shall we say, unexpected third party. The nation of Saudi Arabia. I'm not even joking. Saudi Arabia is a really fascinating country, culturally, but especially economically. You see, wise nations have an economy that is extremely diversified, and for a very simple reason. If one sector of your economy undergoes a period of hardship, then it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme, as the other sectors should still be able to pick up the slack. But if your economy isn't diversified and relies all on one sector, and that industry goes to the dogs, then your entire national economy will likewise be brought down with it. And the problem with Saudi Arabia is that its economy is heavily reliant, pretty much all, on one industry: oil. Saudi Arabia is estimated to hold around 1/4 of the entire globe's oil reserves. Not only that, but the oil in Saudi Arabia is notoriously much easier and thus more profitable to extract than in other places, due to being much closer to the Earth's surface. As a result of this fortunate combination of quantity and quality, Saudi Arabia has established itself as the world's leading oil exporter. Not bad for a tiny little nation. Unfortunately, the drawback from such is that oil represents over 90% of Saudi Arabia's export earnings, accounts for over 80% of budget revenue, and makes up a staggering 40% of their gross domestic product. Which is great for now, but in the future, not so much. As oil is a finite resource, it's going to run out eventually, hence why humanity has started to make the shift away from such fossil fuels to renewable energy. The issue for Saudi Arabia is that when this happens, in its current form, its economy would be set to implode, due to, as stated earlier, not being diversified enough. And as significant economic decline is the number one reason cited throughout history for national chaos, this realization has had the Saudi royal family very worried indeed, not just for their nation's future, but naturally, their own. Hence why in 2016, Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman jump-started the Saudi 2030 Vision, a multi-year-long plan with the primary goal of diversifying the Saudi economy, promoting tourism, architecture, concerts, literally anything to get away from oil. One of the ways this was done was via the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund, something that has actually existed for decades but has recently gone into overdrive. For those who don't know, a sovereign wealth fund is essentially a pot of money saved from budget surpluses that is then used to invest in companies, both domestically and overseas, with the idea being that from such investments, the fund will increase in size, and the nation will thus get richer. Think of it almost like a rainy day fund, but for an entire country. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, known officially as the Public Investment Fund, has a whopping $776 billion in assets under management, which is, needless to say, a lot of money. Not even a drop in the ocean compared to Norway, however, another oil-rich nation, of which has a sovereign wealth fund worth a staggering $1.4 trillion in assets under management. Which, considering Norway has around just 5 million people, means that their government has saved for every one citizen of their country a staggering $250,000 each. Which is, needless to say, extremely impressive. Especially when compared to the UK, which has saved an unbelievable $0 per citizen because it couldn't be asked to set up its own sovereign wealth fund when it had the chance. Oh god. You get one chance in life, and you're British. Oh, Now, one of the most high-growth industries in the world at the moment is, of course, the gaming industry, recently surpassing both movies and music combined. Hence why the Saudi Public Investment Fund started to take a great interest in it, and as such founded the Savvy Games Group, an investment arm of the fund dedicated purely to video games. In 2021, Savvy, on behalf of the fund, bought stakes in numerous large gaming publishers, such as EA, Take-Two Interactive, and Activision Blizzard, and in 2022 continued to do so, with Nintendo and Embracer Group. Embracer Group being the most relevant out of all of these for this story, because they, of course, own Volition. Embracer received $1 billion in investment from Savvy, which, needless to say, is a lot of money. Pleased with this, however, Embracer, behind the scenes, sought more investment from Savvy, of which seemed to be going to plan. Alright, so Embracer made a statement in a quarterly investors report where they stated information about an upcoming deal they were making behind the scenes, and they said, "One result of such efforts to capitalise on the value we have created is a transformative partnership and licensing deal that we have worked on with several industry partners. This deal covers a range of large-budget upcoming games over the coming 6 years. We expect the whole or parts of this deal will close during this financial year. Thereby, it would improve predictability, lower business risk, and provide a positive impact on our cash flow and profits. It would also enable further investments into making even greater games based on both established and new intellectual properties. The impact of the above-mentioned deal will be a factor in our forecasted adjusted EBIT range for this and next financial year." And in addition to sharing details about this upcoming deal, they also made some comments about the Saints Row Reboot, which was recently released during that financial quarter, whereby they said, "The reception of Saints Row did not meet the full expectations and left the fan base partially polarised. The game development studio, Volition, has been working hard to improve the player experience. Financially, Saints Row has performed in line with management expectations in the quarter. Going forward, Volition will transition to become part of Gearbox, which has all the tools, including an experienced management team in the US, to create future success at Volition. This is the first internal group transfer where we transfer a major studio between operative groups, but it is not necessarily the last." So the game was a bit of a stinker, but it still sold enough, apparently. And the developers behind it were being shifted around, but it's fine, because none of this really matters, because what really matters is behind the scenes, Embracer was working on this big multi-billion-dollar deal. And that ultimately was what was important. There was just one problem, however. The deal broke down. In May 2023, after months of negotiation, Savvy Games Group backed out of the investment deal towards Embracer Group last minute for seemingly no reason. And by last minute, I really do mean last minute, as in less than 24 hours before the ink was meant to be signed, before the next legally obliged quarterly report to investors. And this left Embracer Group, who remember, had been including this deal in their financial forecasts, to admit to their shareholders that this was no longer representative of reality. In an extremely awkward visual broadcast, the CEO and CFO of Embracer Group could be seen looking very uncomfortable, trying to explain the situation.
I want to hand over to Lars Wingefors, CEO and President.
Thank you, Martin. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. Today is a humbling morning. Starting today's presentation, we would like to describe some background and rationale for the aforementioned strategic partnership deal. In the second quarter 22-23, we outlined our ambition to close a number of partnership and licensing deals that would be jointly transformative for Embracer. Except for the already announced deals that have more limited short-term financial value, we have been working on one groundbreaking strategic partnership agreement that would have set a new benchmark for the industry. and trust me, I've been spending a lot of time on this. Negotiations have been taking far longer than originally anticipated, considering we had a verbal commitment already in October 22. The specific deal included more than $2 billion in contracted development revenues over a period of 6 years. All documentation was finalized and ready to go as of yesterday. We asked for the execution of the agreement before our Q4 announcement. However, late last night, we received a negative outcome from the counterparty. This decision was unexpected to the management and the board of directors of Embracer.
New financial forecasts had to be made, of which were very unimpressive compared to what was previously expected.
So, we have updated and lowered our adjusted EBIT forecast for financial year 23-24 to 7.7 billion to 9 billion versus previously 10.3 to 13.6 billion in adjusted EBIT.
To translate this into United States dollars, whereas the previous forecast was between 965 million to 1.3 billion, now it was between 655 million to 840 million, which, when visualized graphically, was really, really bad. The new maximum was less than the old minimum. Wow. Overnight, many investors lost faith in Embracer, and the stock price absolutely plummeted, from $41.25 on the 23rd of May to $22.76 on the 24th. A slump that it has not yet recovered from, almost half a year later.
How do you feel on a day like this?
No, it's been a rough night, getting that decision when you have everything prepared, presentation, communication, and obviously you have been working day and night almost sometimes for half a year to achieve something. But hey, this is business, and I know shareholders and other stakeholders expect me to win every battle. This was a big one. And we didn't win this one, but I'm sure we will win many of the future battles.
Now, this may seem like a bit of an overreaction from investors. I mean, after all, this is business, and sometimes deals work and sometimes they don't, right? But the reason investors were probably so angry is because the reason why Embracer included this deal in their financial forecasts was apparently because they got a verbal agreement. But as anyone who knows anything about business knows, a verbal agreement is nothing. What matters is getting your agreements inked on paper, as otherwise, well, situations like this happen.
A lot of discussions, should we have that included into our guidance? Is that how guidance works? That you should have the most likely outcome, what you believe? And that was our conclusions. I'm sure that it could be debated whether you have only legal agreements signed included or not. But obviously you don't have all your revenues signed because there is a forecast. So that and it was also the liability of announcing then a guidance, and then that you have a deal, but then you then announce the change in that, and then you have the deal later. What impact legal liability or what liabilities you have for shareholders that have been trading the shares in that period? Okay, I'm not the expert in this field, but obviously we're taking a lot of guidance on this.
But it's fair to summarize that you had a verbal commitment, you expected it to come through, so it was included.
We have no reasons to question that verbal commitment.
Oh, okay.
Embracer clearly thought this deal was inevitable, but it wasn't, and as such, action now needed to be taken. Embracer would go on to announce a major restructuring, which, for those who don't know corporate lingo, is essentially code for "we're going to fire a fuck ton of people." And that's exactly what happened.
We are also making good progress on the restructuring program, announced on June 13, with the ultimate goal of significantly improve free cash flow and reaching a net debt of 8 billion by year-end. Delivery of the program will allow us to operate with increased efficiency across the group and reduce business risk. This, in turn, will enable us to continue grow and to deliver high-quality products in the long term. At the same time, we acknowledge the uncertainty that such a program can cause for our colleagues. A painful consequence of the program is that a number of talented and passionate team members have left us or will be leaving us before the end of the fiscal year.
Make no mistake, Volition messed up big time with the Saints Row Reboot. But the real reason they shut down, honestly, wasn't directly because of it. It was, unintentionally, because of Saudi Arabia's Savvy Games Group backing out of a deal with their parent company Embracer Group, which forced them to reconsider their existence to appease shareholders. As by the looks of it, had it not been for this deal breaking down, it's very likely Volition would have survived under the Embracer umbrella for a little bit longer, as this initial plan before the deal broke through stated. But due to cost-cutting necessities, they were instead axed. And it wasn't just them either. Campfire Cabal, another Embracer-owned studio, was also shut down a month before for the exact same reason.
Could you share some color on like the timeline in those processes? Is it that you start off with trying to get some kind of agreement, potentially divesting or selling assets, and then later on, if that's not an option, you have to close it down, or maybe try to explain to us to make us better understand other processes parallel to this?
I think it's a bit of commercial sensitivity around specifically how we go about. It kind of varies by studio, but in the end of the day, we try to find new homes for our people. But ultimately, we need to make a final call and doing layoffs in a few instances. But again, you can partnering up, you can do divestments, you could adjust the studio, you could internally find other resources. So there's many ways how to optimize this. In the end of the day, our overarching target is to reach 8 billion net debt in the end of the year. That's our focus.
Great.
And that is the ultimate reason why I'm even making this production.
In the end of the day, our overarching target is to reach 8 billion net debt in the end of the year. That's our focus.
This is bigger than just Saints Row, bigger than just Volition, and bigger than even Embracer Group. It's about what I've been saying now for years. In the last decade, large game publishers and even platforms have been buying out smaller studios and incorporating them into their ranks. And gaming fanboys often falsely find this to be a good thing. For example, when it was first announced that Microsoft was buying out Activision, I made a production where I said this should not be allowed to occur and that antitrust should step in and stop it. Only to be swarmed by Microsoft fanboys calling me a Sony pony because they want to play Call of Duty on Game Pass and don't see the bigger picture. For much like how a nation should have a diversified economy to prevent imminent collapse, the gaming industry should also be diversified to prevent studio collapse. There's a phenomenon that I like to call executive distance, meaning how far away the CEO is in the corporate ladder from their workers. In small game studios, the CEO has a very small executive distance, as they likely interact with their workers face to face on a day-to-day basis. But in a giant corporation, such as Microsoft, Sony, or in this case Embracer Group, the CEO has a very high executive distance, because there's so many layers between them and their workers. The lower the executive distance, the less likely the workers are to get fired, because 1, it's more personal, as they likely interact with such people, and 2, there's less complexity, as the business is smaller and thus easier to manage in scale. But the higher the executive distance, the more likely the workers are to get fired, because 1, it's less personal, as the CEO has likely never even seen the studio with their own eyes, and 2, there's more complexity, as the business is larger in scale. And this story is a prime example of executive distance gone wrong. As none of these parties are even in the same continent. Savvy is Saudi, Embracer is Swedish, and Volition is American. To Embracer, Volition is just a distant margin in their revenue, not faces, but numbers. And if those numbers dry up, because they are so marginal, they can very easily be disposed of to cut costs in times of emergency, such as when deals with international investors, like Savvy, fall through. And this fate is exactly what happens to small studios over and over again. A bunch of shut down studios, often due to unrelated corporate drama, with these large behemoths just going on to hoard their intellectual properties, sometimes never to be used again. Which, in all likelihood, is what will happen too with Saints Row. And this should illustrate perfectly the real lesson here. The amount of gaming YouTubers who are declaring boldly and mockingly that the sole reason Volition died is due to wokeness is unbelievable, as this is really just nothing more than surface level analysis, seeing what they want to see and misdirecting their audience in the process. As wokeness in gaming spawns from either 1, top-down ESG demands from corporate in an attempt to appeal to a wider audience, or 2, activists in the lower ranks who assume that daddy corporate will just bail them out if their game flops regardless. Hence, why the real lesson from Volition's demise, like it or not, is how insufferably globalized the AAA gaming industry is slowly becoming with every year that passes, to the point where even the vast majority of gamers don't even really know why such developments are occurring unless they have experience in investing. Now look, don't get me wrong here, okay? Obviously, Volition messed up big time with the Saints Row reboot. Duh, that goes without saying. But, the real story here from my perspective is, why is the gaming industry, the AAA gaming industry, so globalized that we have 3 companies across 3 different continents, none of which have really properly interacted with each other, who are all financially dependent on each other? Savvy, the Saudi company, wants Embracer Group, the Swedish company, to make more money, but they only make their money through the American company Volition and their other subsidiaries. So, the point I'm trying to make here is, until gaming fanboys realise that their chosen favourite corporation isn't their best friend, celebrating every time some smaller studio gets swallowed up by them. Until antitrust realise that a small handful of companies owning the vast majority of the gaming industry doesn't actually correspond to better competition for customers. And until small independent studios once again start to reign supreme, as was the case for much of the 1990s and 2000s, then the gaming industry will only continue its decline into ESG-approved mundanity, fanboy defences, and studio shutdowns. Which, if you really think about it, is the real story of the Saints Row reboot in a nutshell. Alright, get me out this costume, it's bloody boiling in here, good lord! Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed that, and more importantly, I hope you understand the actual point of the production itself. It's not really about Saudi Arabia, right? It's about, you would not expect Saudi Arabia as a party to be involved in a story about the Saints Row reboot, about the American company Volition, right? You just wouldn't expect it. But that's the reality of a globalized gaming industry. So many people focus on the wokeness, but if wokeness is the cultural problem, then you've got to think of globalization as the economic problem. The two go hand in hand. They're almost inseparable from one another. Where there is wokeness, there is guaranteed to be globalization somewhere in its midst, and you can't just focus on one. really the gaming industry, and not just the gaming industry, but all industries, really have to become a lot more locally owned, a lot more small scale, less corporate. Because corporations owning all these studios is really fantastic if you're a shareholder, or for the most part, or if you're the board of directors, the heads of these corporations. It's not good for consumers, and it's not good for the developers who work at these companies, for the most part, as this example shows. Of course, there's always going to be some examples where a studio would die unless they were bought out, right? There's always going to be stories like that. It's not completely negative. But in cases like this, it is negative. This is a studio that was essentially forced to make something that it didn't really want to make, and is now shutting down because of poor performance by a direct order of the corporation who allowed that to happen, right? I mean, let's just be honest, that's what's happening. And it's all because they wanted to accept foreign investment money that then fell through. This is the plight of globalization, and so I hope you understand that. This isn't like some slight at Saudi Arabia. It's just an example of how globalization can go so wrong. Nevertheless, folks, this Saints Row Reboot saga has been going on now forever. It's been going on now for 2 years, and the Saints Row Reboot came out 1 year ago. Volition is shut down to now, 1 year later. So this is it. This is the end of this saga, and I've got to say it's been quite an adventurous one. But I thought I wasn't going to make this originally, but I thought I would give you guys a capstone production to end it off. And yeah, hopefully you got the point. Anyway, wokeness, globalization, they both go hand in hand. You've got to keep an eye out for both of them. If you like this, then check out my other gaming productions or my other channel entirely, where I upload much more regularly. I assure you, you will like it. But nevertheless, I'll leave it there, and I'll see you next time.